I busted my lip about 20 minutes ago, so it's the size of Texas. Texas. Someone help. Look how fucking swollen it is on the side. My crusty ass lipstick. Hell yeah, dude. I'm just busted today. All of next week's videos were filmed in H's house because all I've been doing today is filming. I'm babysitting his dog Link, who's over there sleeping like a beautiful angel. He hasn't been a beautiful angel all day, so this is fucking amazing. But I'm in H's corner. I have another scary story for you. I read one earlier and I didn't like the story. So here we are. That's what I get for not reading them beforehand. Sometimes I'm just surprised with shitty stories. But this one I skimmed through it because I don't want to spend another hour reading a story just for me to be like, that was shit. Somebody sent me this story and I have been searching and searching through all of my social media to see who sent it to me, and I cannot find it for the fucking life of me. So if you send it to me, I'm so sorry. Just let me know who you are. But this story is called There's a Strange Cop Who Stalks Kids in My Hometown. I live in a tiny town in eastern Utah. My dad owns the hardware store, which sits on the corner of the only intersection with a stoplight. We've got a car wash, a drive-in diner, a bowling alley, and a bar, which only truckers stop at. The only other thing we have in this town is an enduring urban legend. Sometime during the 80s, the drug parts of the 70s reached our little corner of nowhere. It takes about 5 years for new culture to reach places as remote as my hometown. When it does, only teenagers welcome it. The local church parking lot became a sort of haven for high school kids to hotbox in their Mustangs late on Friday nights after the bowling alley and the diner closed at 8. One Halloween, or Christmas, or even 4th of July, depending on who's telling the story, 4 kids rolled into that church parking lot to smoke a couple bowls apiece. Just minutes into the driver's first pull, a police car with markings from another town drove into the parking space on the other side of the lot, without turning its lights on. The kid in the passenger side emptied the bowl out of his window and stuffed the pipe under his seat. A man in a uniform exited the car and walked towards the kids. The driver rolled his window down to talk to the officer, but the officer just stood there. He was wearing sunglasses, which normally wouldn't have been that weird since tough small-town cops usually do shit like that. This cop was different though. He stood outside the car, watching the kids, without saying a word. After a few minutes of waiting in silence, the officer reached an arm into the car and opened the front door. The driver protested, but the cop then grabbed him in a bear hug. He dragged the driver screaming from the car while his friends sat helpless. Eventually, the cop was able to stuff the struggling youth into his trunk, after which he drove the still lightless squad car off into the night. And the kid was never seen again. The story was probably bullshit. I did some research and couldn't find a single missing persons case from my town. There was a place nearby which was just motels and dumpy apartments for tweakers that had one case, but that man was probably in a ditch somewhere festering after a meth overdose. But, like all the stories, there are kernels of truth that get buried over time. The original is like a coffin which gets covered over by layers and layers of dirt, and eventually all memory of the person below is forgotten, and the only thing which remains are a few carved words 6 feet above their head. Maybe there was no kid who got kidnapped by a cop from another town. Maybe it was just a legend started up by parents to keep their kids from smoking weed. That's what I kept telling myself when I drove my best friend Caden to the local church parking lot to smoke last night. We picked a spot that was darker than the rest of the lot. One of the old fluorescent lights had gone out, giving us the perfect amount of shade to keep all but the noises of passing cars away. We idled for a bit, making sure there weren't going to be any interruptions, after which I pulled the keys out of the ignition and opened my glove box. The blunt and my lighter were next to each other on top of the insurance papers. I took them both out and snapped the lighter to life. Just before I was about to touch the flame to the edge of the paper, Caden grabbed my arm. "What the fuck, dude? I'll be quick." I snapped at him, his hand nearly strangling my wrist. He put a finger to his lips and whispered, "There's a cop behind us." I shut the lighter and pulled up the floor mat on the passenger side to hide the blunt under. When I sat up, Caden motioned to a far corner of the parking lot. In that corner sat a squad car with its headlights off and its engine idling. "What do we do?" Caden asked nervously. "We haven't done anything yet. He's just watching to see if we do," I told him. We both stared with our necks craned at the waiting vehicle. As we watched, the officer inside opened his door. The silence in the lot was deep enough for us to hear the equipment jingling on his belt. The cop stepped out of the car and stood next to it, and we didn't look away as he turned to face us. He was wearing sunglasses. My heart rocketed into overdrive and I immediately reached for the ignition. The engine started with a rumble and our headlights flooded the previously dark parking space. I shoved the gear shift into drive and sped towards the lot's exit. As I drove onto the road, flashing red and blue sirens began to go off behind us. Sweat started dripping from the creases in my hands which I gripped tightly to the steering wheel. "Hey man, I think he's using his loudspeaker," Caden yelled at me. "Roll the window down then, Christ dude," I yelled back. He cracked the window enough for me to hear the voice emanating from the squad car speakers. "Pull over now, dipshits." It was Officer Jacobson, one of my dad's good friends. My family had him over a bunch of times for dinner with his family. I babysat his 2 young sons once. God damn it. I muttered and pulled over. A new sinking feeling began to replace my earlier terror. My heart didn't stop hammering while I imagined what my parents were going to say when they had to pick me up from the police station. Officer Jacobson stopped behind us and stepped out. He practically jogged over to the driver's side while I rolled my window down. When he got there, he pulled on the handle to my door. He found it to be locked and looked at us. "Get out of the car," he said, a tone of urgency in his voice. We hesitated, and it seemed to make him angrier. "Get the fuck out of the car now," he yelled at us, and reached into the car to unlock the door. "What the fuck is going on?" Caden yelled at him as he opened my door. Officer Jacobson stepped back from the car and looked away into the distance. When he turned back to look at us and saw that neither of us had budged, he drew his gun and pointed it at me. "Holy shit, what are you doing?" I squeaked and held my arms up. "Just get out and follow me to my car, right the fuck now," he said, and motioned for us to step out. I hurried out with my hands over my head, and Caden did the same, crawling over the driver's seat to follow me out the same door. "Move your ass, kids, come on." Officer Jacobson growled this time, his voice quieter. He was barely even looking at us. We made our way over to his brightly lit squad car and stood at the back door. "What the fuck are you waiting for? Get in," he hissed through his teeth, and we obliged. He hopped into the driver's seat and turned off all the car lights before going into reverse. We backed up onto what I thought was a dirt road, which led off the paved main road. My car sat with its engine and lights still on about 100 yards away. Officer Jacobson stopped the car and cut the engine and didn't say anything while we sat in the dark and watched. He still held his gun, drawn in his right hand. "Officer Jacobson?" I began to say, but he cut me off. "Don't say a fucking word except yes, sir, or no, sir, okay?" "Yes, sir," I said, and I immediately shut up. Caden put his face in his hands while I stared at my idling car on the road. I heard wheels crunching on gravel and noticed that the driver's window of the squad car was open, letting in the sounds coming from outside. My eyes tracked back to the main road where I saw another squad car slowly inching its way towards my own, still idling vehicle. The car had no lights on, and I couldn't make out the markings on the side. The glow from my rear lights were too dim to reveal them. This mysterious new squad car was an older, boxier model, and its engine clattered like it was missing a muffler. The old car stopped right behind mine. Officer Jacobson opened the clip on his pistol, checked for bullets, and then closed it up to load one into the chamber. The front door of the other cop car opened, and out stepped another police officer in sunglasses. I could hear John Denver's Country Roads playing on the radio inside. The officer looked around and then shuffled strangely to my car. He ducked his head through the still open front door, and then whipped back around to scan the dark horizon. He sauntered in the same weird way over back to his car. He ducked his arm under the dash and popped his trunk, after which he stepped around to it and reached inside. I couldn't see what he took out of his trunk, but he slammed it shut as quickly as he had opened it, and then made his way back to my car. He leaned into the driver's side of my car and stayed there, his ass bent out towards us. Right then, Officer Jacobson started the car and turned his sirens on. With his free hand, he pulled the radio from its place on the dash and began yelling through it. "Put your weapon on the ground and your hands on your head." The speakers squawed into the night. The strange officer leaned back out of our car and reached down to his belt. I swear I could have seen his smile as he lifted a revolver in our direction and popped a few shots. One bullet found its mark and shattered the rearview mirror on the driver's side. Officer Jacobson switched the gun to his left hand and leaned his arm out of the window to return fire. The other officer ducked and ran back to his car. My ears started ringing as I saw the other squad car's wheels begin to whirl. The car rushed off, but not before one of its back windows exploded into shards, which sparkled in the blue and red lights coming from our siren. Officer Jacobson hit the gas and raced towards the escaping car. Over the high-pitched ringing still echoing between my ears in the blaring sirens, I could hear a tire scraping against the broken glass the rogue squad car had left behind. In the distance, lit only by our car's brights, the other squad car slowly began to slip into the darkness ahead. I chanced to look at the speedometer through the glass separating the front from the back seats, and thought it read over 100 miles per hour. It wasn't long before the other car disappeared entirely, and Officer Jacobson slowed the car down to a stop by the side of the road. We had lost it. A foul smell reached my nose, and I realized Caden had wet himself during the short exchange. Jacobson turned around and opened the glass separating us. "What the hell were you two doing out there?" Caden couldn't do more than blubber, so I spoke up. "We were smoking, sir." "Why did you try to run away?" He continued quietly. He didn't sound angry or frustrated, just tired. "We didn't know who you were," I started. "But it's a stupid reason. It doesn't make sense." Officer Jacobson leaned in closer. Given what you just saw, I think you should give it a try." He drove us back to the police station. We took mostly back roads and didn't go past the little stretch of road my car was still idling on. Officer Jacobson ushered us inside and began to microwave some water for us in the little break room. As we poured Swiss Miss packets into the steaming mugs and began to sip from them, he called each of our parents and told them we were at the station, but not to worry since we weren't in trouble. He finished the second phone call and pulled up a chair in front of the ratty couch Caden and I were sitting on. "I'd offer you a fresh pair of pants, but none of the lockers are open and I don't keep extras in mine," he apologetically explained to Caden. "It's okay, sir. I'll just take a shower," he said as he held his face close to his hot chocolate. "You boys were smoking?" Officer Jacobson continued. "Yes, sir," I said, sitting up. "Of course you were. It's the best spot," he said. "Or so I hear." He smiled and held a finger to his lips. When neither of us spoke up, he kept going. "I was in high school too, you know. I get it. But seriously, you guys have no idea what danger you put yourselves in tonight." Caden laughed. "I mean, we know now, don't we?" he quipped. Officer Jacobson didn't crack so much as a half smile. He became deadly serious and straightened himself in his chair. "I'm 34 years old. When I started high school, the whole Nirvana thing was just starting to become popular here. Boys wearing long hair, complaining about magazines and TV, stupid stuff. At the time, I had a little brother named Caleb. He was 9, and he loved playing jacks. It was sort of old-fashioned, and not many other kids were into it. I remember him catching shit for it, actually. And I even put my fair share of work into making him feel bad about it. Brothers, you know. There was a Thursday night when my parents asked me to stay home and watch Caleb while they went to visit a friend in a town close by. Our car had something wrong with it, and this friend had offered to fix it for free, but it meant that they would be gone for a couple hours. That meant I had to be home to watch Caleb. Not just Caleb. His weird friend Joshua would be coming over, and I had to keep him occupied too. They had already scheduled a play date, and my parents didn't want to take a rain check since Caleb didn't hang out with a lot of other kids. The problem was, I had made friends with some stoner kids the second week of high school. I'll admit, I was feeling a bit rebellious, and had planned to hang out with these kids at the same parking lot you two were at tonight. Caden and I looked at each other and then back at Officer Jacobson. They were going to pick me up at 5, and my parents were supposed to be back by 6 or 6:30. I felt like I could be back before they showed up, and they would never know I had ditched for an hour. So, when they pulled up in their shitty gray Honda, I walked out to meet them and told Caleb and Joshua I would be back in less than an hour. As we pulled away, I watched Caleb demonstrate the proper way to play jacks in our driveway while Joshua watched on and scratched dandruff out of his hair. Officer Jacobson smiled, but then turned graver than I'd ever seen him. He fidgeted with his badge uncomfortably and continued. When I got back, Joshua stood alone in the empty driveway. The jacks were still laying on the concrete, but Caleb wasn't around. I asked Joshua. He could barely speak anyways. The kid might have been autistic or something. He said a policeman took him so he could teach him how to play jacks, so he could take him home. I was confused. What the hell was a cop doing picking up my 9-year-old brother? What the hell did he do? My parents got back, and Joshua and I were no closer to figuring out where Caleb went. He wiped his face with his hand and tried to keep himself composed. It's been 21 years. 22 years and 6 months. Joshua stuck to his story as long as I knew him. A police officer in sunglasses drove his car up into the driveway, talked to the 2 young boys about the game of jacks that they were playing, and offered to take Caleb with him. He told him that he wanted Caleb to teach him how to play, and that if he did, he would take him home. Whatever that meant. I heard a different story, I interrupted. Officer Jacobson looked at me. I heard that kids went to the parking lot to smoke and a cop in sunglasses just grabbed one and took him. That's why I drove away when I saw you in the parking lot. Officer Jacobson shook his head. I guess some asshole changed it. My guess as a parent. That's something I might tell my kids if I didn't want them doing something. You guys proved it's kind of pointless now, didn't you? He chuckled. But there are no missing person cases on record here, I said. I did a bit of research when I first heard the legend. The only case I could find was this drug addict. What do you mean no missing persons? Caleb's disappearance was all over the news. Officer Jacobson now looked more concerned than somber. I just looked online. I couldn't find anything, I finished. Officer Jacobson left us then and went into his office. I could hear a filing cabinet open and papers being shuffled. Holy shit, I heard him say out loud to himself. He stepped out of his office and looked at us. You better not be fucking with me, he said. I just looked at him confused. I know for a fact that there are 4 missing persons cases in this town since 1974. I looked at all of them over and over again in the hopes that it would be related to Caleb, but the only thing in common is the geography. Caleb's disappearance was the only one with witnesses, he explained. But all those files are gone. Every single one of them. My blood ran cold and chills traveled up and down my spine. If the guy really is a cop, do you think he'd have access to those files? Caden asked hesitantly. Only if he was in our department, Officer Jacobson said. We all sat looking at each other in an uncomfortable silence. That silence was broken when someone knocked furiously on the door of the station. Caden and I jumped, and I heard my mom's voice carrying through the glass doors. Officer Jacobson explained the situation to my parents while they sat with rapt attention. He told them that my car's engine had cut out, and we called him to come help us. Caden, being claustrophobic, wet himself to his embarrassment. I could see a look of skepticism on my dad's face, but both of my parents ended up taking Officer Jacobson at his word. As they drove me home, I got a lecture on safety, making sure I took care of my vehicle, that they were so worried, amongst other things. I went to bed without being able to sleep. My dad got me up this morning while I was still tossing and turning. Officer Jacobson had come over, and he had offered to drive me back in his truck to go get my car. I decided I wasn't sleeping anyways and left with the officer. My car hadn't been moved or even touched since last night. The hunk of junk had died, which neither of us were surprised by, but it was otherwise unharmed. The engine was silent and the lights were off. The front door was still open from when Jacobson had forced Caden and I out. I'm going to get the cable ready. Could you get into the car and steer it? Officer Jacobson told me. We both stepped out of the truck. Jacobson went to the bed where he began preparing the cable, which he would use to tow my useless car back into town. I walked over to the open door and froze when I looked down at what was on the driver's seat. Officer Jacobson must have noticed, since he soon walked up to me and gasped, "Oh, sweet Jesus," he nearly cried. On the seat was a single silver playing jack. What looked to be dried blood was encrusted on the pointed edges. Underneath the small toy was a note card with a short message written on it. I took him home. And that is the ending to that story. I believe there are 2 more parts to it. I really wanted to read the first part, but the second part I was looking at, and it looks like a lot of it is conversations. So kind of hard for me to read. I can do it if you guys really want me to, and I can find a way to like differentiate the characters. That's just if you guys want to hear more for this story, I guess. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any other stories that you would like me to read, go ahead and send them to me. I always have my social media linked down below. Typically Twitter and Instagram are the best places to send them to me. When you send them to me on Snapchat, they get lost and buried. Obviously they get lost and buried on all of my social media because sometimes I just can't find the people who sent them to me, and I'm sorry. I will try better next time. But anyways, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. Hey guys. I'm gonna close the door because it's gonna be rowdy. The local church park